In South Africa, between 1994 and 1995, a man murdered 38 women. He became the most prolific convicted serial killer in the country's history. He was caught. He was sentenced to 2,410 years in prison. And almost no one outside Africa knows his name. To understand Moses Sithole, you have to understand South Africa in 1994. It was a country in the middle of the most dramatic transformation in its history. After decades of apartheid, Nelson Mandela had just been elected as the first black president. Millions of people were celebrating. There was hope. There was possibility. But in the townships, in places like Atteridgeville, Boksburg, and Cleveland, everyday life was still hard. Unemployment was high. Resources were thin. And young women were desperate for work. Moses Sithole knew that, and he used it as a weapon. Sithole was born on November 17, 1964, in Vosloorus, a township near what is now Johannesburg. He was one of 5 children. When he was 5 years old, his father died. His mother, Sophie, unable to support the children, abandoned them at a local police station. She walked them there and left. Sithole and his siblings spent the next 3 years in an orphanage in KwaZulu-Natal. He later described systematic abuse inside those walls. At 16, he ran away. He went to live with his older brother. He eventually found work in the Johannesburg gold mines. In his late teens, Sithole was arrested for rape. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial. He was convicted anyway. He spent 6 years in Boksburg prison before being released early in 1993 for good behavior. That early release was one of the most consequential decisions in South African criminal history. When Sithole walked out of prison, he did not disappear. He reinvented himself. He became the founder and director of Youth Against Human Abuse, a charity he claimed was dedicated to protecting children from violence. He had an office. He had business cards. He wore a suit. He spoke to people confidently and professionally. He offered women job interviews through his organization. They trusted him. On July 16, 1994, an 18-year-old woman named Marina Monene Monama left home. She never came back. Her body was discovered in an open field near Atteridgeville, west of Pretoria. She had been beaten, raped, and strangled with her own underwear. 3 weeks later, Amanda Thethe, found dead. Same location, same method. Then Joyce Mashabela. Then Refalo Makale. Then Rose Magotsi. 5 women. 5 murders. All within a few months. Then 1995 arrived, and everything accelerated. In January, Beauty Soko was murdered. In March, Sarah Makono. In April, Nikiwe Diko. Then Letta Ndlangamandla. And then something that changed the entire atmosphere of this case. On April 20th, 1995, the body of a 2-year-old boy was found in one of the fields. His name was Sibusiso. He was the son of Letta, one of the victims. Sithole had inflicted a head wound on the child and left him there to die from exposure. A child left to die in a field. South Africa had a serial killer, and he was getting worse. By mid-1995, the body count had crossed 20. But the most disturbing detail, the one that would later define this entire case, was not the number. It was the method. Every single victim had been lured by a job offer. Every single one had gone willingly. The South African Police Service formed a special task force. Investigators from multiple provinces were brought together. The FBI's legendary criminal profiler, Robert Ressler, was consulted. He initially suggested the possibility of 2 killers working together. The case was that baffling. The killer had been given a name, the ABC Killer, because his murders appeared to move alphabetically through the city, Atteridgeville, Boksburg, Cleveland. But investigators had almost nothing to go on. No fingerprints, no witnesses who had seen an attack, no forensic trace linking the scenes. Just body after body after body. On July 17th, 1995, a breakthrough. A witness spotted a man acting suspiciously near one of the crime scenes. Police traced the description and discovered that the suspect had a prior rape conviction. His name was Moses Sithole. But before investigators could move in, Sithole disappeared. By August 1995, the body count was approaching 30. Entire communities were living in fear. Women were afraid to answer job listings. Newspapers ran the story every single day. And then, something no investigator had ever seen before. Nelson Mandela, the president of South Africa, traveled personally to Boksburg to appeal to the public for help finding the killer. The president, standing in a township, begging ordinary citizens to come forward. This was no longer just a murder investigation. This was a national emergency. If this case is new to you, you're not alone. Crime Atlas covers the cases that the rest of the world overlooks. Subscribe so you don't miss the next documentary. Now, back to Moses Sithole, because the question nobody had answered yet was, why? Moses Sithole did not look like a monster. He never did. Neighbors described him as pleasant and mild-mannered. Victims' families said he seemed professional and trustworthy. He used that image deliberately. It was his most effective weapon. Forensic psychologists who studied his profile pointed to three converging factors. The first was abandonment. When Sithole was 5 years old, his mother took him to a police station and left. She did not return. That kind of early abandonment, at 5 years old, when a child cannot yet make sense of it, leaves a mark that rarely heals completely. The second was the years in the orphanage. Whatever happened behind those walls shaped how he related to authority and to other people. The third factor was the one Sithole himself pointed to, repeatedly. He was convicted of rape in his late teens, for a crime he always insisted he did not commit. He served 6 years. When he was released, he was consumed by the belief that the woman who accused him had destroyed his life. He said, in his own words, that every woman he murdered reminded him of her. He was punishing substitutes for someone he blamed for everything. In October 1995, with police closing in and his face on every newspaper in South Africa, Moses Sithole picked up a phone and called a journalist. Tamsin de Beer was a reporter at a South African newspaper. The man on the other end identified himself as the ABC killer. He wanted to talk. During the call, Sithole admitted to the murders. He explained his reasoning. The largest manhunt in post-apartheid South Africa's history was launched. On November 6, 1995, 16 months after the first murder, police finally cornered Moses Sithole in Johannesburg. When officers moved in to arrest him, he attacked a constable with a hatchet. Police shot him. He was taken to hospital. At the hospital, doctors discovered he was HIV positive and had active tuberculosis. After 16 months, after 38 confirmed murders, after a nationwide panic, after a presidential appeal, it was over. The trial of Moses Sithole opened on October 21, 1996, at the Pretoria High Court. He pleaded not guilty to all charges. On December 3, 1996, the prosecution introduced a video. It had been secretly recorded inside Sithole's jail cell. In it, Sithole sat calmly and described his murders in detail. He explained his method. He discussed his victims. He showed no remorse. On December 4, 1997, the verdict was delivered. It took 3 full hours just to read it aloud. Guilty on all 38 counts of murder. Guilty on all 40 counts of rape. Guilty on 6 counts of robbery. The judge said, in direct words, that if capital punishment had still been legal in South Africa, he would have had no hesitation in sentencing Sithole to death. Instead, he sentenced Moses Sithole to 2,410 years in prison. He is not eligible for parole until he has served at least 930 years, which means he would qualify at the age of 963. 38 women entered fields they never came home from. 14 of them were never even identified. Their names are still unknown. Their families never got official answers. They existed. They had lives. And they were taken by a man with business cards and a fake charity. Moses Sithole is the most prolific convicted serial killer in South African history. He committed his crimes in broad daylight, in one of Africa's largest cities, using nothing but charm and a lie about a job. And almost no one outside this continent knows his name. Now you do. If this case deserves to be heard, and it does, subscribe to Crime Atlas. New documentaries every week, covering the true crime stories the world forgets. Drop a comment below. Why do you think African cases like this go so underreported? I want to know what you think.